And good morning, Bruce Pearson back with you here at Jersey Talk Radio. We are live once again at the Jersey Access Group in Morristown, New Jersey for their annual convention, conference, if you will. Very busy here on the vendor floor. We have over 50 vendors, and there's a lot of workshops going on today and tomorrow, a lot of attendees, and we had a gentleman on earlier today from Hawaii. Our guest right now, however, comes from up the coast towards Beantown from Bridgewater, Massachusetts, and I'd like to welcome Russ Hannigan. Russ, thanks for coming on the show today.
Well, I'm honored to be a guest on your show.
Tell me, first of all, your background a little bit so the listeners and the viewers can get to know you and find out.
Well, I'm a graduate of Boston University.
Oh, very nice.
Grew up in New Jersey, so it's sort of my old stomping grounds down here in Morristown. I served 3 years in the Armed Forces in the U.S. Army as a broadcast journalist.
Thank you for your service.
And thank you for your service, too. You're with the Coast Guard.
Well, yeah, I'm very proud of being able to do that. So anybody that served, I think, has a pride in being able to take part in that. So, and actually, you worked in this field as I did. You were a press officer.
Yes, did public affairs at Fort Bragg for a year. Served in Armed Forces radio and television in Honduras and in Korea.
Wow.
So, got to see a little bit of the world thanks to the Army.
Well, as did a lot of guys. Luckily, you weren't seeing Vietnam or Saudi Arabia. Thank you very much.
Must have been between wars. I got lucky.
Or Bastogne. We're not that old, but yeah. So tell me tell me what happened after college.
After I got in the Army, I actually started working in commercial radio and TV. I worked for New England Sports Network for a while.
Oh, Nessa, sure. Very familiar with them.
Cleaning satellite dishes in the middle of a snowstorm, not as much fun as people make it
Yeah, with the broom, yeah.
With
they
the
didn't have any, with no heated...
Well, they had heat, but it was snowing so much, and we'd have to climb up there, and I was always afraid it was going to just slide off and go off into the parking lot. After that, I had a friend, Michelle Roy, who introduced me to public access television. She said, why don't you come down to Brockton? You could do some camera tonight. I'm like, well, how much does it pay? She goes, oh, it doesn't pay anything. I'm like, and why would I be doing that? And she explained the concept, because in the military we hadn't heard about public access TV, and I got hooked. Worked in Revere, Massachusetts for a while, and then down in up in Lowell, Massachusetts for a while, then down in Falmouth, and now I'm in East Bridgewater. Yep, on Cape Cod.
Now, Cape Cod has a pretty advanced community access program. I know when I'm up there on vacation, I get to watch. And Provincetown has a channel. I know there's one there in Orleans.
Yeah, and very good one in Orleans, by the way.
Yeah, they do a lot of programming, and they do a nice job of it. So. It's interesting because obviously one of the chronic problems with the all the PEG channels is there's never proper funding. How does the state of Massachusetts address your funding, and how well set are you guys in terms of having the money to do what you need to?
Well, luckily we have very strong support with Mass Access, which is the statewide chapter of the Alliance for Community Media. And we're very dense when it comes to public access stations, so we have a lot of support from the communities. One of my favorite stories, there was a situation going on up at the State House, this is quite a few years ago, and we all found out this was going to occur, and they were going to have a hearing, and they were going to try and do this very quietly, push this bill through that would have affected funding in a very negative way for us. Well, we showed up with our cameras. And the one thing I've learned in life, when politicians see cameras, they're either terrified or they're happy, depending on the situation.
No middle ground.
Yeah, and they had to move us from a very small hearing room, because so many of us showed up, to the much larger hearing room in the State House. And we still managed to pack that room. And that sent the appropriate message, because a lot of the folks who went up and testified that day, including myself, said, oh, and by the way, this will be seen by your constituents on your local public access station in X community. And they sort of got the message, and the bill quietly went back into, and disappeared.
Really?
So, yep. Doesn't mean they won't try it again.
No, but and that's an interesting point, because being an investigative journalist and documentary producer for a good part of my career, anybody that works in the media, and certainly you are in a much different setting, understands the control that is exercised inevitably by the money, the funding. You know, the money controls, unfortunately, a lot more than we'd like to admit, or maybe people now admit, a lot more than it should. Yeah. So it's you know, I always used to say you're never going to see GE criticized on Face the Nation because GE owned NBC and they produced the show. I don't think they're going to bite the hand that owns them, much less feeds them. Yeah. It's sad. In a perfect world, you know, everybody would like to have a pristine fourth estate. However, that's not real. When people spend their money, they want something in return, and that applies to politicians. And so we're pretty naive to assume that you'll fight against that kind of the physics of finances and the way the world works. What have you experienced political pressure or content or any of those kind of subtle or direct forces upon your operation that you can discuss without putting your putting your neck in your own noose? Yeah, but put your own noose on.
Well, I've been doing this since the 1990s, and over the years, yeah, I've seen political pressure in situations. One of my favorite stories, this was years ago, and I think I can safely say it now just because the case is over and he's in jail, and I don't think anything further is going to happen now, but we had a gentleman when I worked in Revere who wanted us to follow around the local politicians in his car with one of our camera kits as investigative reporters seeing what evil things were being done. And I tried to explain to him this little thing called rights of privacy, and that we couldn't do this sort of thing. And he just refused to accept that as a fact and kept harassing us. And right around that time, the local editor-in-chief of the Revere Journal was putting together the newspaper. I would have loved to have seen him doing this that night because he had two big headlines he was going to put on the next day's paper. The organization this gentleman I'm telling you about worked for was called Citizens Against Municipal Mismanagement, or CAM. So the headline was, CAM claims great injustice against the town, illegal use of equipment, blah, blah, blah. And the other headline below it was, CAM official indicted on federal charges of racketeering and bribery. And this was the gentleman who, as I said, wanted us to follow around the local politicians. And that particular one, just karma, I think, comes to mind.
That's interesting.
As far as I know, the organization eventually disbanded. But Revere, Massachusetts is a very unique town.
In what way? Could you share?
Well, the nickname that cracked me up the most when I moved there, they used to refer to Revere as the New Jersey of Massachusetts. I said, no wonder I fit in here so well.
Yeah, really, that's pretty sick.
A lot of just little incidents. I can remember a riot breaking out at a local Chinese restaurant, and it was the Revere police who were rioting. Who do you call when the cops are the ones breaking up your restaurant? I can remember a situation where a local hair beautician, and this actually happened, beat out a Harvard graduate for a position on the school committee. Hence the expression, only in Revere could this happen. Through the years, there have been different levels of political pressure, but I think what happens is with groups like Mass Access and JAG, where you can talk to your fellow access centers through listservs and through Facebook and everything else, you can find out how to deal with a situation appropriately because some other town has experienced it before.
What about it seems to me that in areas of public policy, I know from my experience on Cape Cod, the whole wind generation issue out on the Nantucket Shoals was a very contentious issue, and some unique citizenry groups headed by Walter Cronkite and Ted Kennedy's family and so on and so forth weighed in much more heavily than their numbers would have advised. Have you had to deal with those public policy issues, and have you been stuck in the middle of that, or have you been able to keep yourselves pretty well generic and say, hey, we're just here to cover it, you guys, the citizens make up their minds?
Well, in public access, we try to remain neutral on issues, and show both sides, which amazes me because I have friends who are Democrats and Republicans, and they both look at me equally, which is good. That's the way it should be. There's sort of an unofficial motto in public access that says, I may not agree with what you have to say, but I'll fight to my death for your right to say it. I can remember when I worked in Falmouth, that issue came up as far as the windmills, and what I recall, and I'm hoping I'm recalling this correct, was Cronkite did come out initially against the windmills, but then when he discovered what the whole story was about, he retracted his statement. But at that point, it had already been too late. Flyers had been put out, and Walter Cronkite, let's face it, that's a heck of a name to get on any side of any issue, because he was once referred to as the most trusted man in news. But I can tell you that Deb Rogers, who's the executive director for Falmouth TV, does a tremendous job of making sure that both sides of any issue get covered and that everybody has a voice. And I think that's the one thing that public access can do. What you mentioned earlier, where you're talking about stations that are owned by GE, they'll try and do as balanced as they can, but they know there are certain landmines they can't go anywhere near, because if that explodes, then there goes their paycheck.
The reason I bring this up is obviously that it shows that there's a lot. It's just not to turn a camera on and cover a council meeting. There's a lot more that goes on in our communities, and it's a sensitive area, because in many small communities, I would say, well, let's say, obviously, most small communities, there's no WCVB there. There's no Channel 5 covering the news. There's lucky to be a weekly newspaper anymore.
And that's
so it falls back to you in a much more dramatic way than it ever did in the past, where you had some diverse media coverage that's either, in the case of radio, been consolidated to 6 or 7 companies now, and in television, it's only the major cities that have it. So in a way it's very good, but it certainly elevates your importance to carry these issues. And I think the neat thing that goes hand in hand with that, the technology allows you to do that. Now people can watch this. They don't have to be cable subscribers if you make it available on demand and are you doing any streaming at all?
Yes, we live stream our public access channel.
Good.
And when we cover municipal meetings, especially town meeting, we're sure to live stream that so that folks who don't have cable can see it. We also have video on demand on our website.
Which is invaluable. That's where all content consumption is going, as well as the handheld devices.
Plus, although we don't do ratings per se because we're not a commercial station, what always amazes me is if there's a controversial issue on a selectman meeting or a school committee meeting, like a day after it hits our video on demand website, we always get this huge spike in viewers. And we all know immediately
that you're doing your job, and I think that's the important issue out of that it's a tool, and even though you try to keep your technical standards up, you're not producing the Super Bowl. It's a tool, and it's a communication tool, and if it's easy to get at and it's as widely distributed as possible, that's the mandate. You try to remain unbiased. Human beings can't be unbiased. We all have a background as a journalist. You know that you bring to the table in the best of condition. But it's a valuable service. And for many, many decades, in most community access settings, it floundered because it was never supported. It never had any emphasis. People didn't watch it. They were on standard definition with garbage equipment. I mean, everything that could have stacked the deck against community access was out there. The cable companies hated the whole concept. They did everything they could, in many cases, in my experience, to fight it, to screw it around, to jerk it all over the place so that people would just get tired of it and wander away from it. Because then it saved them the hassle of having to really put any money into it if they could weasel around it. I'm painting the cable companies as the villains in this, but the fact of the matter is, they're in it to make money, not to provide public service. Like it or not, the two mandates, the mission statements are at odds. So the fact that we now have good quality and good technology to really do a quality product very cost effectively video on demand so people can watch it when they're available to watch it, not when the council. You know, I've always said to people, well, if you could attend the council meeting, you wouldn't have to watch it unless it was snowing. The reason this makes a difference is I'm working, or I have something else going on at night, or I have to get up at 5 in the morning. You know, I'd like to take a look at it how could you do that in the past? It was never recorded. It was lucky to have an audio recording of it. So it's a very strong. Do you do any entertainment or sports related programming?
Oh yeah.
Tell me about that.
We cover EBHS. Well, as an experiment this year, we just rebuilt our production truck. We covered varsity baseball for the first time, and that came off very successful. We definitely cover basketball, and we cover those games live, which when I started 11 years ago in East Bridgewater, it was a single camera in the stands, and we'd have to do a lot of post-production. Now, the difference between our improved technology and our improved school, we do them live with announcers, with public service announcement breaks, the whole bit. And I think we look as good as any commercial station. That's our goal, is not to offer the same content as commercial stations, but to offer the same quality as commercial stations. So if someone's flipping by the dial, they're going to stop because of the content, not because it's commercial or whatever.
But they're not going to pass it because the content is crap.
Exactly.
And they're not going to find a middle school basketball game on anybody's cable channel. Now, do you offset with sponsorships and to augment it, or are you allowed to do that?
Not at this time. It's something I've talked to my board before about. But they want to try and stay away from that aspect right now. I mean, further down the road, there are a lot of concerns with what's going on with cable, with the TV top boxes and what's going on with that, with the various forms, as you said, watching it on your phone, watching it on your iPad, which I think have to be addressed by the Alliance. There's going to be a national conference this summer in Boston, and I'm hoping these are the issues that are going to be brought up and discussed, because it goes back to, as you said at the beginning, the funding mechanism. And we have to make sure that we're secured in our funding mechanism so we can continue our job. Now, the other thing is, many years people have said public access is going to die, it's going to fall off the vine. Years later, we're still here.
Well, I think that you've had a renewed value, because you are replacing commercial outlets that are no longer viable in a brick and mortar
hyper local.
And it is, and it's highly focused. It's rather than having broadcasting, it's microcasting. And which has always been the mission and the focus of community television. I sense in my crystal ball that what you're going to have coming down the road is a backlash, where what's going to happen is, as you and the other broadcasters go to streaming, they're going to say, hey, you're not using our distribution channel anymore to the extent you were, and you're deriving revenue from streaming, and you're deriving viewers. We think we ought to cut down our funding.
We right now aren't doing that. We are doing live streaming.
But I'm saying the folks that do and will inevitably do it, because 5 years from now, nobody will be avoiding streaming. It's not going to happen like it was in the past.
It's going in that
inevitable.
direction. The technology is constantly changing. But I think the smart thing is, we've got to get up there at the state level and at the federal level and continue to lobby our senators and our state reps and our congressmen and explain to them how crucial this is to them. And the thing with the local access stations is, we often provide a voice for our senators and for our congressmen and for our state reps that costs them absolutely nothing.
The power of the incumbency. And there's no doubt about it that that's an enticement. Mm-hmm. Free airtime is free airtime.
Yes.
And especially now. I just finished last week doing a major corporate broadcast on Facebook. Mm-hmm. That's huge. And that was free. Cost nobody anything. And one of the largest companies in the world broadcast live their keynote speeches out of Orlando. And there's the power, the impact. It's hard to imagine what the landscape will look like 5 years down the road.
Yeah. I'm astonished at just the changes I've seen in the past 30 years. I know. Starting out from an old black and white, real videotape machine to now I'm using SD cards and live view and everything else. And this just, I mean, I never would have conceived of radio like this when I started in the industry.
No,
it was astonishing.
And the speed of the change, driven by the technology, but I think it's the social. You know, one of the things in our society and in the world, I think we develop technologies much faster than we can assimilate them and understand how they fit in with us as human beings. And I think that gets worse and worse and worse. We have stuff coming at us that we can't even figure out. You know, kids sitting next to each other texting 2 feet away. That's a function of technology being available before you can figure out how to work with it.
One of my favorite moments, this was a few years ago in East Bridgewater High School. They had what they referred to as a code blue, where they shut down the school because of a possible threat. All the teachers locked the doors, locked the windows, put the kids aside. The funny thing is the teachers weren't sure what was going on. All the kids did. Why? Because they were texting each other from room to room, passing messages along to each other, letting them know what was occurring in the school. And that's where the kids actually leapfrogged the local authorities and got the word out about what was happening. And we're even able to tell their parents at home, school's locked down, don't pick me up right now. And I think it's a thing that the administration and the town governments still haven't sort of gotten their hands around and grasped how to use the technology. I mean, there are some things now, like, I don't know if they have it in New Jersey, but reverse 911, where they can put out a speed call.
Yeah, they do.
Okay.
Yeah.
But this was, again, concepts that didn't exist many years ago. And it's amazing, this technology, the way it's being used.
And we could spend hours talking about surveillance and tracking people and so on.
Yeah.
But I appreciate you coming in. I think it's a statement about this event to have people come all the way down from Massachusetts to attend, and we appreciate you coming down.
Well, it's important. They put on a really good conference. I've been here every year. And just a chance to see all these vendors. We're working on upgrading our equipment. This is a great place to sort of one-stop shop and look at all the different forms of technology.
You've seen everybody that's the big players in all the different areas, and you don't get this opportunity if you spend the money to go to NAB.
And get demonstrations.
Yeah,
you know.
Exactly. You can talk to these people. You're not swamped with 20,000 people trying to get into a booth. Yeah, everybody, anybody in the industry is here. So. Well, thank you very much for coming down.
Thank you.
We appreciate it, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. Keep up the good work up there in East Bridgewater, and hopefully when up that way, I'll watch some of the content. So
I'd actually like to hear more about you sometime.
No, you wouldn't.
Yes, I would. Yes, I would.
You only
Sounds
do
to me
that
like you've had an interesting life as well.
You're under subpoena, so that's the only way you'll get it out of me. But thank you very much. This is Bruce Pearson. We're coming to you live from the New Jersey Access Group Conference in Morristown, New Jersey at the Hyatt. We'll be here today and tomorrow. We've got about 50 vendors. If you're within striking distance of Morristown, the New York metropolitan area, Philadelphia, the tri-state area here in the mid-Atlantic, it's worth coming out and meeting these folks and talking. A lot of workshops. Please avail yourself to it. And we'll be back in just a bit. I want to thank my guest again for coming in and spending some time telling us about your operation in East Bridgewater. So we will talk to you later, and we'll be right back, so don't go anywhere.